Hello Team FD and welcome back to Winners and Losers, the show we break down the latest and greatest Premier League action. Joining me, it's one of our greatest, it's Dougie Critchley. How are you? This is quite refreshing seeing you on a Monday morning here.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I haven't been on a lot of Winners and Losers recently, but I'm delighted to be here. I had a lovely weekend. Not probably as emotional as yours, Chris, fielding a lot of, goodbye messages.
I can't stand anymore. It's really chipping away at me. Very nice.
Getting a lot of love.
Though. Everyone has been extremely lovely. So thank you for that. And if you don't know what we're talking about, check out my Twitter feed. Can't go back into it now. Will burst out into tears. And someone else who almost burst out into tears over the weekend. How's that for a segue? Antonio Conte. We're starting with our losers this week. The next clip will be our winners, but it is, of course, Tottenham Hotspur, who endeavoured to draw 3-3 with Southampton on Saturday, putting a dent in the club's Champions League ambitions. Now, the nature of which they surrendered their lead definitely tipped manager Antonio Conte over the edge, didn't it? And it's been coming all season, but this was a maelstrom of emotion from the Italian. Took no prisoners in his post-match press conference, producing a number of iconic soundbites, I would say. Premier League years written all over that interview, honing in on the players' lack of commitment and lack of winning mentality, let's say. Today, we're going to dissect that interview using the footage because we're owned by Sky, so we should probably utilise it in some way, shape or form, as well as the performance that provoked it. Let's start with the latter then, the match, Dukes. Break it down for me.
Well, Southampton, to be clear, have actually been okay in the bigger games this year, which is probably worth saying. I think they've beaten Chelsea twice. They drew with Man United recently. They knocked City out of the Carabao Cup. But Spurs were cruising in this game. They were absolutely cruising. They were 3-1 up, and their first half was pretty excellent. They had 8 shots to Southampton's 6. They produced almost twice the XG. Pedro Porro scored his first Spurs goal.
Oh, my
lovely finish. Oh, it was lovely, right into the roof of the net. And then Kane got another one. He was in great form, throughout this whole season. Probably one of the few Spurs players that can say that. Perisic got his first goal for Spurs as well. Quite surprising that it's taken so long. I don't think that move, which is clearly an Antonio Conte signing, has gone as well as people expected. But, things were looking good for them because Southampton had been forced into a lot of changes as well. Bela Kotchap had to come off after 8 minutes for Salisu. Bednarek had to come off after 34 minutes for Maitland-Niles. So that was the starting pairing gone. And not to mention the fact that Gavin Bazunu, I feel harsh on hammering a 20-year-old, but I don't think he's had a very good year.
No.
To say the least. The worst keeper in the league by XG against, 12 under his expected, what he should be expected to save. And I'm amazed that they haven't changed to Alex McCarthy in recent weeks. Anyway, so the situation was really favourable. But then it happens. They just fall apart far too easily, as we have seen time and time again this season. Theo Walcott, rolling back the years with a goal and an assist against, Spurs, ex-Arsenal. It's a lovely moment for him.
Didn't celebrate at all.
No, quite niche actually.
Quite subdued,
as well.
yeah.
But for all the players to be torn apart by Theo Walcott coming towards the end of his career, it's pretty damning. And then Pape Matar Sarr gave away a penalty 5 minutes after coming on. James Ward-Prowse bags it, talked about afterwards in the interview that it was against his best mate, Fraser Forster. So that was a little side plot anyway. But Chris, let's talk about the defending, because oh my, that was bleak.
Dear, oh dear. I mean, the ball that Lavia plays to Walcott for that equaliser, Che Adams' goal, was absolutely delicious, but a lot of space between Perisic and Longley. And Perisic actually came on in this game for Davies, who had to go off injured around the 40-minute mark. And maybe that's why Davies has come back into favour in recent weeks, because of his defensive discipline, his positioning. That wasn't very evident here when Perisic came on. Now, the backline, a total mess for Theo Walcott's goal as well. The ball is turned over in Spurs' third, which we know Southampton are pretty adept at. That stems from the Hasenhüttl era. They've very much continued in that fashion, haven't they? And then the cross comes in and Perisic and Skip are competing for the same header, and there's 2 men on the line. It's just panic stations, and Walcott actually puts it away pretty coolly, I would say, as coolly as his celebration was afterwards. But yeah, I mean, if Spurs had won this game, we'd be spinning a very different narrative right now, wouldn't we? That's how fine the margins are at Tottenham. They would have made it 4 wins out of 5 had they held on to that win, taking them to 3rd place on 51 points, and we'd be talking probably once again about how they're approaching the right sort of form at the right sort of time. Like last season when they only lost 1 of their final 10, which meant that they pipped Arsenal to the post, didn't they, in terms of securing that 4th place berth in the dying embers of the season. But now, instead, because they have thrown away this result, we're talking about a manager that doesn't want to be there at the most crucial point of the season. So you used the word implosion earlier. It feels like that has triggered, more of an implosion. Do you understand his behaviour or some of his remarks before we go into the specifics? What's your feeling about his general approach, reaction?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty surprised, but having said that, as you've pointed out, it was sort of coming all season. I think he's got to take a fair amount of blame. I think they've signed 9 players this season. They've got Destiny Udogie coming in next year as well. They spent over 170 million euros. These are lots of players that he wanted as well. Lots of his signings haven't worked out whatsoever. We saw Richarlison last week saying that he was a SHIT situation and that he was promised to be picked against Milan. Didn't happen. But in the biggest games this year, in the crunch games, the Sheffield United defeat, the Milan defeat, they haven't been good enough. At the same time, there has just been a culture of underachievement at Spurs for a long time. And I think a lot of Spurs fans will relate to what he's saying. They've hired, since Pochettino, and even in the final days of Pochettino, they were going backwards, but Mourinho, Nuno, possibly not the right appointment either, Conte. And Mourinho and Conte, similar style of football, results first managers, and they haven't got the results in a period where they've got 2 world-class players in Son, Kane. They brought in Kulusevski recently, who looked like an excellent player. His form slightly drifted in recent weeks as well. So this felt like the massive opportunity under a winning manager to finally go over the line for the first time since 2008. And it feels like Spurs has broken Conte, but almost Conte has broken Spurs as well. Like, this feels like almost their lowest point, which is remarkable given their place in the table. Probably shouldn't reflect that. But I thought the way he went about it, sort of eviscerating Levy, the owners, the players, it was just a man going out swinging because he knows he's got 10 games left or whatever it is of the season.
You can see why he's frustrated, like you've said, because he is just so used to seeing progression, particularly in his second season. This is not something he's had to deal with before at a top club, where he's going backwards in his second campaign after getting players, like you've said, who are very much his signings. I think if we look at the numbers now and compare them to that of last season, not a huge discrepancy, but they are just starting to drift, aren't they? So they're 7 points better off after match week 28 last season. They conceded 16 fewer goals and scored 8 more, so huge swing there. Won 2 more and lost 3 fewer games. So just to go back to the phrase I used earlier, fine margins, but I think he'll just be annoyed that any possibility of consolidating Spurs as a top 4 side seems to be as far away as ever at this point, particularly with Brighton and Newcastle having games in hand. Now, they actually have to play both of those sides in the next 4 fixtures. So while every game right now is season defining, if they don't get results in those games, they're going to find themselves in the UEFA Conference League spot, 6th, not having Champions League football, with Conte leaving at the end of the campaign and Harry Kane not having signed a new contract. So it is all coming to a head, isn't it? And talking of coming to a head, let's move into the interviews because we did want to just go through them. And I think it's worth reminding ourselves what Conte said just after the 3-1 victory over Forest last week first.
But in the past, I think that is not important. It's important the present and the future. Now we know we have 11 games to go, and in every game we have to try to get points because, and you know very well that in England it's not easy. I think we have to pay great attention, don't drop points.
On top of that, also said this the week prior to that.
To finish in the top 4 is like to win the Premier League. It happened last season, and I spoke about miracle. I continue, maybe in this season will be much more difficult.
So before we get into the clip that's produced all the press, all the headlines, they are slightly conflicting messages, aren't they? So he's challenged the players to go on a run to secure Champions League football, but at the same time he's also said that securing Champions League football last season was a miracle and that it's going to be harder to do that this season. So he's asking the players theoretically, to perform more than a miracle while simultaneously getting pissed off with them for it not happening. It is conflicting,
It's mixed.
like I said. And you might have seen the clip we're about to play, but let's run it back for your viewing pleasure.
They used it here. Don't play for something important. Yeah. And they don't play. They don't want to play under pressure. They don't want to play under stress. Yeah, it's easy in this way. And Tottenham's story is this: 20 years that there is the owner and never won something. But why? Only for the fault is only for the club or for every manager that stay here. And I have seen the manager that Tottenham had on the bench. You risk to disrupt the figure of the manager and to protect the other situation in every moment. And now, until now, I try to hide the situation, but now no, because I repeat, I don't want to see what I have seen today, because this is unacceptable. Also for the respect for the fans.
I think ultimately what might have annoyed him the most is that by the end of the 90s, Southampton were deserving of their point, and this is the basement side in the Premier League, Dukes. Is this what the numbers were saying as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a pretty bleak display by the end. Southampton had outshot Spurs. This is a Southampton side, as Chris says, who are bottom of the league, who had lost to Brentford in pretty grim fashion during midweek as well. They put more than double the amount of shots on target as Spurs. That was 7-3. They produced more XG. So to be so dominant in the first half and completely flip in the second just shows an embarrassing lack of application. I think it shows mixed messaging from the manager. It shows that the players aren't good enough maybe for his demands. But at the same time, are those demands the right one? Are they ceding too much possession, ceding too much control, ceding too much territory when they don't have the players to keep out this onslaught that comes on pretty much every game? They never put together a full game, and it's actually rare that it happened to have a good first half and a bad second half, because normally this season it's been the complete opposite, And it feels like it's not all been doom and gloom. Even in 2023, they've beaten Man City, they've beaten Chelsea, they've beaten West Ham, but losses to Villa, this draw here, the Sheffield United, the Milan exit. It just feels like the club cannot put together a consistent run of games. And whether that's on the players or the manager, it's up to the viewers to describe, or whether it's whether it's the overall structure and the feeling around the club and the lack of investment over multiple years and sort of attitude that's pervaded the club is up for debate as well. I feel like it's a combination of all four, really.
What you were saying there about sort of ceding possession, interesting that only two of Southampton's players had average positions in their own half. This is the basement side in the Premier League, and they are dominating the Spurs half, pegging them back by the end of the fixture. And I think it was Romeo Lavia had 13 final third entries by the end of the 90, which is more than Højbjerg and Skip combined. Big future for him. Not so much Conte at Spurs. Anyway, yeah. So cue absolute disgust from Conte. We've ran the bit that got all the headlines as well. He did ultimately sort of touch upon the fact it was, like you've said, a lack of application, bad attitude, said the club don't pay them to be mediocre. It was really scathing. Dukes, would you say that his stewardship is untenable at this point? Does he need to be replaced now rather than in the summer to give the manager coming in a fighting chance to pick the players back up, to revamp the squad? We saw Daniel Levy do it to Mourinho, on the cusp of a cup final, for God's sake.
Yeah.
What about now?
I mean, that was a bolder call. Sorry, this would be a less bold call to sack Conte now than that. I think that was quite surprising, and it shows that Levy has been cutthroat. He's been cutthroat in transfer dealings. He's been cutthroat with managers, and Conte has come for him. He's come for the owners. He's come for the entire structure of the club. He's come for the players, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if he is sacked. The only thing that makes me think he might not be is that his contract is up in the summer. They won't have to do even a small payout with 10 games to go. And can they get the manager right now to come in to make a big difference? You almost want to start with a clean slate in the summer, with a full pre-season and a full transfer window behind you. Is that easier on the incoming manager, or do they get a sort of someone for, to be in charge for sort of 11 temporary games. But there's quite a few good managers that could be coming in the summer.
Yeah, I mean, we've got the shortlist down here. These are the favourites according to Sky Bet. We've got Pochettino. Ryan Mason is second. I imagine that is very much on a temporary basis. Luis Enrique third is an interesting prospect.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk to you about him. Marco Silva is, of course, having a great season, although maybe the table does lie slightly with regards to Fulham's progress. I think they have the most expected goals against, but find themselves in the top half. Sorry, Henry, mate, but I think it's all a little bit of a facade. Vincent Kompany after that, and Thomas Tuchel. I mean, Thomas Tuchel would be an outstanding appointment, but I very much doubt he would be taking the job under these circumstances, although lots of similarities with regards to shape, maybe the general approach to games, so maybe not the roughest transition. Okay, 2 questions. Who would be your ideal candidate and who would be the pragmatic one, let's say?
Yeah, I mean, I think all these managers are so tied up with the futures of other clubs as well. Diego Simeone at Atletico Madrid, there's still talk, particularly in January, that he would be leaving. Luis Enrique is the favourite to get that job as well, but that'd be a massive departure. Simeone to Luis Enrique is absolutely massive. So is Conte to Luis Enrique as well. Possession-based manager, 4-3-3, was excellent during his time at Spain, couldn't get quite over the line there. Good work at Roma, good work at Barcelona, of course, as well. I don't see Thomas Tuchel going there. Marco Silva doesn't fill me with any confidence, neither does Vincent Kompany. I don't think he's quite ready for that. Pochettino just feels like such a admission that everything in the last 4 years was almost a mistake. And they've spent so much money, or so much more money, under Mourinho and Conte than they did in the final days of Pochettino. And so to bring him back would just be an ultimate admission of, where could we have got if we'd given Pochettino the same backing? I think there's 2 managers out there that play completely different styles of football that could do a job. If you wanted to do the defence first route, someone like Marcelino, who's got such an established reputation for improving clubs in the top tier of Spain that are probably of the similar sort of stature as Spurs in that league.
Valencia,
Sevilla, Villarreal. And then Gerardo Seoane, a much more open, expansive manager, did really well at Bayer Leverkusen last year, got them into the Champions League, got Patrick Schick, Moussa Diaby, Florian Wirtz playing so effectively. An injury to Florian Wirtz at the start of this year, and it sort of fell apart for him a little bit. But his Champions League campaign was still pretty good. They took 4 points off Atletico Madrid. So I'd either go for Marcelino or Gerardo Seoane, just because I think they're more realistic. But if you can get Luis Enrique, that'd be really exciting as well.
What's happening with Gallardo, the River Plate manager?
Yes.
He's very highly thought of by top clubs in Europe, isn't he? Yeah, it does feel like the Pochettino return is inevitable at this point. And also we're flagging that Conte's win percentage, which is 54% at current, is exactly the same as Pochettino's when he was at Spurs. But of course, Pochettino managed 293 games, so we should perhaps give him a little bit more credit on that front. Both better than Jose Mourinho's 51%, but again, coming back to fine margins being the real, what success looks like at Spurs is decided by very few things, right? And yes, it doesn't look like Conte is going to be around to achieve that. I would probably go for Pochettino and just swallow my pride if I was Daniel Levy in the summer. But what do you lot at home think? Let us know in the comments below. Who is your ideal candidate? Are you aligned with me? Are you aligned with Dukes? We want to know. We want to hit you up in the comments, like I said. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please do so with notifications on. Like the video and make sure you stick around to bear witness to our winners video, which is coming very, very soon. See you there.